sermon this morning is kind of a report on our mission trip and a witness from those who went in keeping with Jesus' command to love one another and our celebration of the ELC anniversary. God's work in our hands. We're going to report to you what we did in St. Mary's. So,
are you going to show that while time?
no,
okay.
when you're done, then I'll.
Okay. Last fall, Marianne contacted me because she said, we're doing a mission trip. We had done a couple in the past, and she said, I want to do it, I want to organize it. And she contacted me because we wanted to be sure it didn't overlap with or conflict with the area festival that the handbells usually go on. And the idea was to have the mission trip to be a family-oriented mission trip. And I said, great, let's do something different. Having my belt hat on, I said, well, you know what? We've gone to a lot of area festivals. I looked at the choir that we had. I said, all of them had already participated in area festival. And if we were going to Korea, I already knew what they were going to act like while they're on a festival. So I said, you know what? Let's change our mission, do a different mission trip, and go on the trip with them. So we had a couple meetings, and we said, how are we going to do this? We said, Ginger was on the committee also, and she said she was on the trip out to Arizona. And said, you know, it's great to be able to have a place where we could all get together and cook together and do stuff together. And then, you know, do we fly, do we drive? And I think eventually we decided, let's find a place that we can drive to. So Barbara said, why don't we get in touch with Lutheran Disaster Relief? And through there, Marianne found SALT, which is Schoharia Area Long-Term Disaster Recovery. And you know, we've been talking about God sightings, and I sat there and said, God sighting, Schoharia. It's not a common name, not a common city you would know, but I happen to know Schoharia because at the Hudson Valley Festival in April 2012, the Schoharia Handbell Choir of the United Presbyterian Church was the group that who was our beneficiary, because during Hurricane Irene, their church was flooded with 6 feet of mud and water, and so their handbells had been totally destroyed. Their cases, the bells had muck and mud all over them, all their equipment, their tables, their pads. I'm just talking about bell stuff, but their tables, their pads, the coverings, all their books, or the music, gone. So the Handbell Festival decided that they would be our beneficiary. So that's how I knew Schoharia, and I said, okay, God sighting. There's no way that this could not be a God sighting. So I contacted Sarah Sipperly, who is the daughter of the handbell director. Her mother had to relocate because her house had been destroyed. And a lot of the members of the bell choir had to be relocated because they were still working on their house. And while we were there this past summer, actually, I think her mother had just moved back into her house. And, you know, contacting Sarah, she was able to provide us a home while we were there. We used their church. They had a Christian Ed building there that allowed us to use their kitchen. So Ginger and I and Miyako and her daughter Bridget, we all kind of helped and cooked meals there for everyone. We eat there. We had fellowship there. The church was opened up to us so that we could have service there. When we got there, she also was able to give us first-hand account of the damage that was done in the area. How every Saturday since the hurricane, they had these work days. At night, when you drive through the village, you notice that only the second floor lights were on because that's where everyone was living, because the first floor was still unoccupiable. So it was great to get that first-hand experience. You don't really think about why there's only lights upstairs, or the story about how the only business that came back was a Stewart's gas shop. They actually they decided immediately that they were going to come back in and help the town, because that's the only grocery store that's anywhere close. I mean, it's really a convenience store, but they were able to stay in there. And Sarah also gave us great local places to eat so we could help the businesses in town. So there's a lot of things that's basically how we got there, and I think it was great that we had a connection there. We did a workshop there and got some ringers to get interested. Again, she had been struggling about what to do. Her mom had been the director of the handbells up there because they they're still getting people to come back. She felt it was her calling to work with the youth. There was a lot of youth that had been working every Saturday on, cleaning things, doing things that need to be done. So it was a good time for her to say, hey, look, I want to work with these youth. And so when I last spoke with her, they had a band camp where she brought out the bells and was able to get some youth interested. So hopefully the youth choir will come from there. So, and there was a lot of stuff that, when Hurricane Sandy hit, I think the discussion did come up about why we decide not to, why we go help at Sandy. But with SALT, we had been told that it would take 3 to 5 years, even after a year and a half, after the storm, for them to fully recover. And I know some of the people talk about it, but they lost about 25 to 30% of their population. And for those who pay taxes know what that means. It means there's less families, less money for the town. So it kind of brings back that it's not quite done yet. For me personally, we were out of power for 11 days and then we came back. So that was a slight inconvenience where you're looking at a whole town that was devastated by the storm, and it's going to take them 3 to 5 years to get back. So I'm glad that we decided that we want to let you know that we haven't forgotten. And I know that Sarah was very appreciative to know that we haven't forgotten about them.
My job is to show you a few pictures of what we did and just give you a little background. We have some other people who are going to talk more personally about what the trip meant to them. We gathered, we went up to Cobleskill to stay Sunday after the 4th of July, and then on Monday we gathered at SALT headquarters and found this great opportunity to take a picture. 22 of us from Emmanuel went, a whole variety of ages, and worked really hard. The first Monday, we spent our time working in Schoharie. And as Aiko said, this is a year and a half, almost 2 years after the hurricane. They're still rebuilding. There's a family that had a barn that had gotten flooded up to the roof. And as I mentioned earlier, if any of the trip participants, if I narrate these pictures incorrectly, just say, wait a minute, Pastor, that's not really what happened, and we'll get it straight, okay? Because nobody will be surprised that I got the story a little bit wrong. But the barn on the right was flooded up to the roof and needed to be taken down, but the owner had a lot of wood in there that could be salvaged. So a group went to take the wood out of the barn. These are the working conditions that they were in. By the end, all the wood was cleared out and sorted into piles, such as you see here, and then the barn was scheduled to be demolished because of water damage. They attracted a crowd of onlookers as they were working. Schoharie is a very agricultural community. The Schoharie Creek, which is what flooded and devastated the town, is also the source of the water that helps that to be a vibrant agricultural community. So we see the upside and the downside of water. We experienced that during our trip. Another group of us went to work at a woman's house that had nothing done to it in the year and a half since Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee came through. And so our job was to take up floors in the kitchen so that the wood underneath could be gotten to and treated. Some of the work that was done, you see Ben on the left here and Marion on the right, some of the work that was done was to salvage whatever material we could. The woman who lived in the house was a single woman with a child and of limited means, so we were doing our best to salvage whatever we could. Some of that work was very much precision work, such as you see Ben and Marion doing. Some of it was just swinging a sledgehammer like Erica is doing here, because the problem is when the flood comes, the water goes up into the walls and mold gets inside. Unless that's abated, the house is unlivable. So the result was to be able to take the walls out up to 4 feet. You can see that many of these walls are plaster walls, so it's not that difficult. And then that could be replaced once the mold abatement is done. We also had, so we worked from about 9 to 1, and then in the afternoons we did some things in the neighborhood. Bob Peak has a cousin who owns a farm called Calbella, and we went up and visited them. So their herds, this is Bob's cousin in the middle, there's Bob and Sally and Patrick. So we had an interesting time visiting a working dairy farm, and that was a cool experience. And then we had ice cream. Just a little bit of ice cream. The next day we went to Salt and said, what do you need us to do today? And they said, we're wondering if you'd be willing to go to another town nearby that had a flood about 2 weeks ago. Another creek overflowed and inundated the town, as Aiko said, with mud and water. So they asked us if we'd be able to go up there, and we said, absolutely, whatever you need. This is our guide and facilitator, Bill, and he was explaining what had happened in the town called Fort Plain. One small group of us went to this photography studio. The man had a basement that got flooded right up to the rafters. So everything in the basement needed to be taken out. And unfortunately, the walls had been at one time, it's a very old building, and the walls had at one time been paneled with tongue and groove boards. They all needed to come out, so we spent the day working, taking everything out so that he could get his shop back up to speed. It's a very poor community. The majority of the people are on public assistance. So it's a very poor community, and for businesses to be able to thrive there is really important for them. So Bob and Sally and I spent the whole day removing these boards and making a pile outside. This is what Bob and I looked like at the end of our experience. We were a little dirty, but quite happy and satisfied that we were able to help Tim get his shop back and running. And then another group went to help a woman who had to have everything on her first floor taken out. And it's very, as you can see, here's Peter Corey removing a fiberglass tub so that the walls and floor underneath could be accessed. It was very strenuous work, tearing down walls. This is Luke on the right, and as you can see here, on the left of the picture, it's all plaster and lath. So it's very intensive work. Here are Barbara and Nancy taking the wall down so the mold abatement can be done. Here are the girls just pulling stuff out and pounding it on the curb. I think I have a curb shot that I can show you. We thought this was a God sighting as well. On the United Methodist Church, do unto others as if you were the others. Aiko also led a handbell workshop, and our kids practiced and played for the Thursday evening service that we had at the United Presbyterian Church in Schoharie. Ben did some bell repair while he was there. We celebrated the Curry's wedding anniversary, which was a lot of fun. And we got more ice cream. I think, is that the baby cones? It had 3 sizes. The smallest was baby, and that's what that is. So if you've ever gone through Schoharie, stop and get ice cream. Here's a kitchen crew working to prepare meals. We all worked together and had some good meals. Sometimes we ate at the church, and sometimes they asked us to eat at local restaurants to help the economy. So we did that too, and I've got a funny story about that coming up in a little bit. Then this is also Fort Plain. The river came up, the creek came up and basically flooded out this man's building. And you can see all the mud that's there. And his father lives in a house on the property. And we spent our time, the mud was up, this is a basement apartment, the mud was up to the ceiling. So the only thing they could do was wait till the water receded, and then the mud was taken out by hand, by us. So here Luke and Patrick. This picture is a little bit deceiving because I used the flash. Otherwise, it was pretty dark in there except for daylight because, of course, there's no electricity, and you just shovel the mud, put it in buckets, and take it outside. And that's what we did for fun. Here's a building that collapsed because of the flood. Fairly new building that had the first floor taken out because of the water. And right next to this building, where you can see the end of a tractor on the right-hand side, a woman who was in a mobile home on that side of the road. Her home, she was a 94-year-old woman. The mobile home got washed down the creek and she would drown in the process. So that was devastating for the community. It's a small community and they know each other, care about each other. This is more work being done on one of the houses in the neighborhood. You can't see this picture too well, but this is Allison Curry, and her hair is white from plaster dust that got all over her hair. And that's why we wore the face masks to protect us from the dust and other things that were in the air. And here's the crew with a bunch of junk that they were able to take out of, well, it's junk now, right, that they were able to take out of the house. Hard-working piece. We're really blessed. And there's Bob eating chicken wing. We stopped at Fort Plain Pizza and had lunch. And then Barbara has a friend up there who owns a small horse farm. How many horses? 8 or 10 horses. And so those who wanted to got to go horseback riding that afternoon right nearby. a good group that had fun. And then, in the hotel, they had a bowling alley. So we went bowling and had a good time together. It was a really nice combination of working hard and then finding time for fellowship and enjoying one another's company. Here's the house next door to that first house in Fort Clinton that I showed you. The gentleman in the middle with the bandage on his arm is the owner, and unfortunately he was a bit of a hoarder, which you'll know is a disability that people have. And he couldn't bear to part with stuff, even though it was flooded and just totally messed up with mud. Eventually they were able to let us come in and help him clear out his basement, but he had to look at just about everything, I think, and say, okay, you can get rid of that. It was a very emotional experience for him, as you can imagine. Some of the houses were condemned and no longer inhabitable. They'd have to be torn down. It was just, and this is remember, this is 2 weeks before we got there. The devastation was still pretty obvious. Oh, and then we went to Howe Caverns. And this is Ben and Ego renewing their wedding vows. Well, not exactly. The kids on the boat ride. This is Indian Glen. Look what we found. There's Maple Road. You may have ancestors that you forgot about who settled up there. So, in looking for places to eat, Sarah told us about this great barbecue place, and I called them up and they said, yeah, we can accommodate you, but it would help us if we knew beforehand what you wanted. So we looked at the menu, and the place is owned by a man named Eric Larson, Eric with a K. And on the outside of his trailer, he had a license plate from, I think it was South Dakota. So when I got up to the window to place my order, this is Eric standing next to Bob right here, and his fiancée who's working with him. I said, Eric, do you have a minute for me to ask you a question? He said, sure, go ahead. I said, are you originally from South Dakota? And he kind of looked at me, and I said, let me guess, you have Lutheran roots. And he looked at me some more, and I bet you're a Swede. Now he's thinking at this point that I must be like a carnival sideshow guy who guesses weight and age too. But I said, no, I put this all together from the fact that we're Lutherans and I know a thing or two about Swedish Lutherans. And it all turned out to be true, and we had a great meal there at the barbecue. And then on Thursday night, the bells played. We had a very meaningful service together. Friday we spent helping the Presbyterian Church do some of their repairs. So some of the girls and I did some painting on the wall and on ourselves. And others painted their picnic pavilion and did a really nice job. And this is the heads of our kitchen crew. And the crews on their way back to Maryland. And Eric has given us the thumbs up on that. If you have more questions, you can speak to any of the trip participants after the service. But that gives you an idea of the work that we were able to do and the fellowship that we were able to enjoy. I'm going to ask Susan to come up and say a few words about her experience.
Pastor, you're a tough act to follow, but I'll do what I can. Okay. My experience on the mission trip to Schoharie County gave me a wonderful feeling. We all worked together, and a lot of it was very physically demanding work. But for any of you who are interested in going on another mission trip, I must say there's something for everyone to do, whatever your physical condition. It's not that you have to be robust and sturdy to do heavy lifting. There was wonderful cooperation between all the members of the group, and I felt that everyone was doing their very best to help. The first day, as you saw in the pictures, we worked in a barn, moving heavy logs and cut trees and lumber out of a garage that had suffered flooding the previous year. A lot of this required an assembly line with 2 or 3 people holding the log and passing it on to 2 or 3 other people. The day after that, we went to Fort Plain, to the house that was in the picture, and our group worked in the town that had been flooded very, very recently. Here we worked to remove the sheetrock on a very old house and remove the nails as well, so that they would not rust when new sheetrock was put up replacing the old. This house was a duplex home to a grandmother on one side and a single parent and her high school age daughter on the other. And she was there, and I had to say I felt very sad for her because she was, well, it was her home that was being taken apart. The following day we returned to the same street, and this was the day we shoveled heavy mud filled with wet magazines and newspapers buried in the mud. This was the man who was the collector. It was strenuous work, but we did it. It also required teamwork, since the need was to shovel it into pails and then pull the pails out to the street and empty the pails that were heavy with wet mud and magazines and dump it on the street to be cleaned up by the town. How did this feel? It felt wonderful. It felt wonderful to be working with like-minded people, doing something of service for people in need. I wish we could have done more. We ate together, we worked together, and later we enjoyed being together and relaxing. I felt that a lot was accomplished for all of us on more than one level.
Thanks, Susan. Ben, I'd like to invite you to come up and share a few words.
For me, the mission trip turned out to be an opportunity to see firsthand the challenges that these folks were facing, and to empathize and stand with them, and to make an effort that had an immediate positive impact in their lives. I have a couple of examples that I just want to talk about with you. First was we were working on a house in the town of Fort Plains. It was actually the second house that you saw in the photo. There was a picture of us standing in front of this house, and there was debris on the street, you may recall. And what we were doing was to help this family, the grandmother and the single parent, move their belongings out of the house and into the yard, and simultaneously help remove the finishes in the house so that we could, so that later a contractor could come in and sort of put in the new drywall and all those sorts of things. And what you didn't see in the photo was that in the backyard, in the yard, we had placed all of these things that we were able to salvage from the house. So there was furniture, and there's clothing, and the kids' toys, and all that sort of stuff. And I would remember just sort of looking around at it and thinking, how, what would this feel like if it were my stuff? And, I just had not imagined that situation before I went up there. I remember when ACO first thought to me that we were going to go up to Schoharie, upstate New York, to help people recover from Irene. I thought to myself, how bad could this be? I mean, it's been a year and a half. This is upstate New York. It's not the Jersey Shore. It's not Staten Island, but it actually was really bad. And it made me feel good to be able to do something that had, sort of an immediate positive impact for the people there. Second example was that on the last day, we actually were not originally planning on working on that day, but we decided we wanted to squeeze, a little bit more time out. That was sort of how enthusiastic everyone became about it. And we went to work for a young family in Schoharie that had recently purchased a house. They had come in after the storm, and they had purchased this house, which was actually a beautiful house, albeit recently flooded, so it was damaged. And as I was working, I was thinking to myself, well, why are we here? I mean, this is a family that actually didn't suffer through the flood. They bought into this community after the storm, and they knew what they were getting into. And I was thinking to myself, why are we here? This just doesn't seem, like it's consistent with the other things that we were doing, which would help people that really, didn't have any means. And it occurred to me while we were working, and actually I think a bunch of us sort of came to the same conclusion. We talked about it afterward, that the people who are moving into this community are doing so, you know, in the face of the fear that what happened will happen again. You know, a lot of, after the flood rolled through and, you know, in these subsequent storms, businesses and people moved out. I think Eiko said that, you know, they lost like 25 to 30% of their population. I think it was like half of the businesses decided that they weren't coming back. And a community just can't sustain that kind of a loss without, you know, bringing more people in. And so one of the really important things that Saul did was to offer incentives to people that would move into the community in the form of volunteer help to rebuild these houses and businesses. So, you know, these folks, you know, decided to take the risk because they knew they were going to get some help. And that is really about shoring up the community and helping people who, you know, unlike the 50% of the businesses who moved down, some of these people don't have the means to do that. They didn't, I think, you know, many times they were saying the insurance companies were giving them 10% of what they actually lost, and they just don't have the means to just pick up and find another place to live. And so what SALT was doing was actually about supporting the people who were there and could not leave that community. So in the end, I just came away with this increased sense of purpose. And I remember saying to the pastor a couple of times in the week after that I had felt like my life had a lot of meaning that week, and that was really important to me. And I'm actually looking forward to going back next year, and I hope we can get a big group of us to go, because it's hard work, but it's amazing to see the immediate positive impact you're having in the lives of people who really need the help.
And finally, I want to invite Nancy to come up and share some of hers.
I had another God sighting this morning because our prayers in the beginning were all about water and speaking, you know, and the blessings that water is. And on our trip, we learned about the fury of water. And it started for us, for Barbara, Sonia, and I. We started out on the Taconic, and all of a sudden we're in this severe thunderstorm. And then we sat at the top of a hill, and we sat, and we sat. And 45 minutes later, about 45 minutes later, Sonia and I decided to go check it out. And we walked out, and we went around the curve, and there was a flood. It was a flash flood covering the entire Taconic, going from east to west, covering both lanes. And it just put in our mind right away what we were getting into, but little did we know what we were really getting into, because it was a lot worse where we were. We finally got there safely, turned around, and got to our destination, and then got to see what the fury of the water really did. And for me, part of it was we saw a lot of threads coming together, and Eiko spoke about Sarah and the bells, and being at the area festival, and meeting Sarah and her mother, and you know, finding out their story. And when our group went to the barn the first day, I was speaking with Christy, the farmer's wife, and she was asking how we had come about to be there. And I was telling her about our bell group and about the area festival and that. And she said, oh, my mother-in-law was a bell ringer in the Lutheran church. So it was like all these little things just kept, you know, coming together. But I think for mostly for me, it was almost a healing trip for me. As a lot of you might know, my hospital where I work, I'm an intensive care nurse, has been in turmoil for months, since January. And with the gauntlet that we might be closing in a minute, and coming up to that time, there were no more patients in my unit. We weren't doing anything. We were nurses just sitting there, not being able to help anybody. So for me to get this opportunity to go on this trip, you know, I sent an email to Mary Ann. I'm like, can I still come? I think I can get the day. And she said, come on, come on. So there I was, and I really feel that God provided me an opportunity to work out my frustrations, my anger. Breaking down walls with sledgehammers really does help. But you know, it was able. I found a way that I could find a way to care for people that I've been missing, that I hadn't been able to do. And when we went to the house in Fort Plain, and I was hearing the story of the family, and then someone told me that Renee was the nurse. And that just like got me. And I'm like, here I was, you know, I can help another nurse. And she had to go to work. She couldn't be there to help break down her house and do all of this. She had to go to work to provide for her family, so we were there to be able to help her. And I think this whole healing thing for me was being this part of this faithful community, and with these 22 other people from Emmanuel and the people from the Presbyterian Church and everybody that we met. And we worked hard together, but we had a lot of time together, and I got to make new friends, and it was just a wonderful healing experience for me. So it wasn't just what we were doing for them, it's what it did for us. And then the last thing was when we had our gathering on Thursday night, Pastor asked us to speak and to have our, you know, different our feelings, and Sarah stood up and we had a discussion about going to Fort Plain because we felt like, well, we came to work in Schoharie, how can we leave them and go to Fort Plain and not do what we were going to do in Schoharie? And Sarah stood up and she said she just wanted to thank us because she felt that we were an extension for them in Schoharie, because they so wanted to help the people of Fort Plain, but that they were almost empty now. They were so tired from doing their own jobs and fixing their own homes that when we came and said, you know, we're going to go up there, they were like, you were an extension and a blessing for us. And when I heard that, I was like, it was all worth it. So it was a wonderful time. It was a hard work, but it was a blessing for all.
Well, thank you all. Just a few stories from our trip. We are planning to go back beginning the week after July 4th next year. And you'll begin to hear more about that, but we hope that you can join us. I just want to ask the trip participants to stand up so that if people have questions for you afterwards, they know who you are. So could you guys stand up just so folks can see you? And if you have questions, you want to get in touch with the folks that are here. Great. We'd love to talk to you about what we experienced and invite you to come along with us. Thanks.